The stars looked different through the observation deck of the stellar dawn. As it moved through hyperspace toward the outer rim, Dr. Elena Rodriguez pressed her palm against the cool metal wall and watched the blue streaks of light flash past the reinforced windows. She had dreamed of this moment since her first xenobiology class at the academy. First contact with 3 apex predator species on a single world. The chance to study how evolution shaped intelligence in beings designed to kill. Captain Jake Morrison stood behind her, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. He wore the standard diplomatic escort uniform, but Elena could see the way he carried himself. 20 years in the Marines had left its mark on his posture, his watchful eyes, his habit of cataloging every exit in a room. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chang and Corporal Mike Torres flanked the doorway, their own military bearing barely concealed beneath civilian clothes. "The briefing materials don't do justice to what we're walking into," Elena said without turning around. 3 species that have been at war for decades, each one perfectly adapted to dominate their environment. The Fenrithi with their pack tactics in the forests, the Ursani using brute force in the mountains, the pelagic ruling the oceans with calculated precision. Morrison nodded. "The Galactic Council thinks human neutrality might help broker peace. We're not allied with any faction, so we can speak to all 3 without prejudice." Elena turned to face him. "Do you really think it will work? These aren't just territorial disputes. These species have evolved to see everything else as either prey or competition. Their entire culture revolves around dominance through violence. Sometimes the only way to stop a fight is to put someone in the middle who both sides respect more than they hate each other," Morrison replied. "That's where we come in." The ship's communication system crackled to life. Ambassador Kethver's reptilian voice filled the observation deck. "All diplomatic personnel report to Briefing Room 7. We will be dropping out of hyperspace in 30 minutes." Elena gathered her research materials while Morrison signaled to his Marines. They moved through the ship's corridors with practiced efficiency, passing crew members from a dozen different species. The stellar dawn represented everything the Galactic Council stood for. Cooperation between different forms of life working toward common goals. The briefing room was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Ambassador Kethver stood at the front, his scaled hide glistening under the artificial lights. The Saurian diplomat had spent decades negotiating peace treaties throughout the Outer Rim. His large yellow eyes surveyed the assembled team with calculating intelligence. "The situation on Kepler 442b has deteriorated since our last report," Kethver began. "The 3 predator species have expanded their conflict zones. Fenrithi pack raids have pushed deeper into Ursani mountain territory. The Ursani have responded with devastating attacks on Fenrithi forest settlements. Both species have begun hunting in pelagic coastal waters, forcing the ocean dwellers to launch retaliatory strikes against land-based targets." Zilthara, the insectoid Vexani trade representative, clicked her mandibles nervously. "The economic impact extends far beyond the planet. Trade routes through the system have been disrupted. Resource shipments have stopped completely. The Galactic Council is losing patience with the situation." Elena raised her hand. "What about previous mediation attempts? Have other species tried to negotiate with them?" Kethver's expression grew grim. 3 attempts in the past 5 years. All ended in failure. The Altarian peacekeepers were driven off within days. The Centauri diplomatic corps lasted 2 weeks. Before abandoning their mission, the Rigelian mediators never made it past the initial contact phase. Morrison leaned forward. "What makes the Council think we'll succeed where others have failed?" "Humans have a unique perspective on warfare," Kethver replied carefully. "Your species has experience with internal conflicts that eventually led to lasting peace. Perhaps this experience will resonate with the predator species." Elena noticed something strange in the ambassador's tone, the way he emphasized certain words, the slight pause before mentioning human warfare experience. But before she could analyze it further, the ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. The main view screen activated, showing Kepler 442b in all its scarred glory. The planet was beautiful and terrible at the same time. 3 distinct biomes were visible from orbit. Dense green forests covered half the landmass. Towering mountain ranges stretched across the northern continent. Vast blue oceans connected everything with deep trenches and shallow coastal areas perfect for amphibious warfare, but the scars were everywhere. Massive burn marks in the forests, where chemical weapons had been used. Collapsed mountain peaks from orbital bombardments. Dead zones in the oceans where biological warfare had poisoned entire ecosystems. This was a world where 3 apex predator species had been locked in total war for generations. "We'll establish a base camp in the neutral zone," Morrison announced. "An ancient alien structure that all 3 species consider sacred ground. Nobody has violated that space in over 100 years. Elena studied the tactical displays. "The Fenrithi will send a pack delegation, probably led by their war alpha Grimjaw. The Yasani will send Battle Chief Korthuk and his personal guard. The pelagic representative will be Depth Hunter Sileneth, though she need environmental suits to survive on land." "Impressive that you've memorized their leadership structure," Chang observed. "When you're dealing with apex predators, knowing the hierarchy can mean the difference between successful negotiation and becoming dinner." Elena replied. The shuttle bay doors opened as they descended toward the planet's surface. The ancient structure rose from the landscape like a mountain made of black crystal. It was older than any of the 3 species, a reminder that other civilizations had once thrived on this world before the current. Inhabitants arrived. Morrison checked his sidearm out of habit, then caught himself. "We go in unarmed. This is about trust, not intimidation." "Are you sure that's wise?" Torres asked. "These species have been killing each other for sport. What's to stop them from seeing us as just another target?" "Because they invited us here," Elena said. "Each species agreed to this meeting. That suggests they want a solution, even if they don't know how to achieve it." The shuttle touched down on the ancient platform. Through the windows, Elena could see representatives from all 3 species already arriving. The Fenrithi moved in perfect formation, their Volf-like bodies flowing across the landscape with predatory grace. The Ursani stomped forward with earth-shaking steps, their massive bear-like forms radiating raw physical power. The pelagic emerged from portable water tanks, their shark-like features adapted for a meeting that would take them far from their oceanic home. "Remember," Elena said as they prepared to disembark, "we're not here to judge their culture or their methods. We're here to find common ground." Morrison nodded. "Our security detail consists of former Marines, but we're operating under diplomatic protocols. No weapons, no aggressive postures, no military terminology that might escalate tensions." The shuttle doors opened, and they stepped onto the surface of Kepler 442b. The air was thick with the scent of violence and death. Even in the neutral zone, the atmosphere carried traces of the ongoing war. Chemical residue from weapons, burned vegetation from forest fires, the metallic tang of spilled blood. War Alpha Grimjaw approached first, his pack flanking him in a loose semicircle, his yellow eyes fixed on Morrison with predatory intensity. Battle Chief Korthuk followed, each step making the ground tremble. His massive claws left gouges in the ancient stone. Depth Hunter Sileneth moved more carefully, her environmental suit allowing her to breathe but limiting her mobility. "We welcome the human delegation," Grimjaw growled, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "Your reputation precedes you," Elena stepped forward. "We're honored to meet representatives of 3 such accomplished species. I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, xenobiologist and diplomatic attaché. This is Captain Jake Morrison, our security chief, along with Staff Sergeant Lisa Chang and Corporal Mike Torres. All 3 are former United Earth Marines." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. All 3 predator species froze simultaneously. Grimjaw's pack began whimpering, their aggressive postures collapsing into submission. Korthuk's massive frame started trembling, his claws retracting instinctively. Sileneth's razor-sharp teeth began chattering uncontrollably inside her environmental suit. For a moment, The most dangerous predators in the galaxy looked like frightened children. Then, as if responding to some primal instinct, they began to retreat. The Fenrithi pack scattered in all directions. The Asani delegation backed away, their eyes wide with terror. The pelagic representative dove into her emergency water tank and sealed the unit completely, within minutes. The neutral zone was empty except for the confused human delegation. Elena looked around in shock. What just happened? Morrison checked his weapon instinctively, then remembered he wasn't carrying one. I have no idea. Did we say something wrong? Chang and Torres exchanged glances. We mentioned our service record, Chang said slowly. But that shouldn't have caused this kind of reaction. The silence in the neutral zone stretched for long minutes after the three predator species had fled. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stared at the empty space where moments before the galaxy's most feared warriors had stood trembling like prey animals. The ancient black crystal structure seemed to mock their confusion with its eternal stillness. We need answers, Elena said finally, breaking the spell. This reaction wasn't normal fear. It was something deeper, something genetic. Captain Jake. Morrison ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Elena had learned meant he was processing tactical information. We split up and approach each species individually. They might be more willing to talk without the others present. That idea, Staff Sergeant Lisa Chang interjected. 3 apex predator species just ran from the word Marines. Going after them separately might trigger their hunt response. Elena shook her head. Chang's right about the risk, but Morrison's right about the approach. These species have been at war for decades. They won't talk honestly in front of their enemies. We need to understand what that word means to them. Morrison nodded slowly. Torres and I will track the Fenrithi. Chang, you go with Rodriguez too. Find the Asani. Lieutenant Adams stays on the ship to research galactic databases. There has to be some record of what happened here. Lieutenant Ben Adams had been quiet throughout the encounter, his young face pale with confusion. What am I looking for exactly? The word Marines appears in thousands of military records. Look for gaps, Elena suggested. Missing data, classified files. Anything that might explain why 3 different species would have the same terror response to our military designation. The team separated with careful coordination. Morrison and Torres headed toward the dense forests where the Fenrithi had disappeared. Elena could see their Volf-like forms moving between the trees, but they maintained distance from the human approach. The pack behavior was different now. Less aggressive, more defensive, Elena and Chang took the mountain path toward Asani territory. The rocky terrain was scarred with claw marks and blast craters from decades of warfare. Every few hundred meters they found evidence of the ongoing conflict. Broken weapons, dried bloodstains, and the occasional piece of armor that had been torn apart by massive strength. The Asani evolved from bear-like ancestors, Elena explained as they climbed. Their entire culture revolves around individual combat prowess. They respect strength above all else. If we can prove we're not a threat, they might be willing to talk. Chang checked her empty holster out of habit. And if they decide we look like dinner? Then we hope 20 years of Marine training counts for something even without weapons. They found the Asani delegation in a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside. Battle Chief Korthik sat on a throne made from the bones of defeated enemies, his massive form still trembling slightly. His lieutenant, a scarred warrior named Burlask, paced nervously around the perimeter. Humans approach, Burlask growled in heavily accented galactic standard. Why do you come to sacred ground of Asani? Elena stepped forward carefully, keeping her hands visible. We seek understanding. The word that caused fear. We need to know why. Korthik's small eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. You speak of the death word, the name that brings nightmares to cubs still in their mother's den. Marines, Chang said quietly. You're talking about Marines. The reaction was immediate. Both Asani warriors flinched as if struck. Burlask's claws extended reflexively, gouging stone from the amphitheater floor. Korthik's massive head shook back and forth in denial. Do not speak it again, Korthik rumbled. The old ones told stories. Stories of pale deathbringers who came from the void. Creatures that made the strong weak and the fearless afraid. Elena felt her heart racing. When did this happen? How long ago? Burlesque approached cautiously, his scarred hide telling stories of countless battles. My great-grandfather fought in the time of burning stars. He spoke of ghost warriors who showed no fear even when facing the strongest Orsani champions. Your great-grandfather? Elena calculated quickly. That would be roughly 200 years ago by Galactic Standard Time. The ghost warriors came when the three clans were locked in the Great War, Burlesque continued. They fought not with honor, but with something else. Something that turned our greatest warriors into whimpering cubs. Chang leaned forward. What did they do exactly? Korthik's voice dropped to a whisper. They hunted us. Not for food or territory or honor. They hunted us because they could. The stories say they would enter our deepest caves armed with nothing but metal blades and emerge victorious against warriors who had never known defeat. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. These ghost warriors, did they have a name? The death word, Burlesque said, his voice barely audible. The name that cannot be spoken without bringing shame to our ancestors. Meanwhile, Morrison and Torres had tracked the Fenrithi to their forest stronghold. The pack had regrouped around a massive tree that served as their meeting place. Elder pack leader Velinara, War Alpha Grimjaw's mother, waited for them with yellow eyes. That held the wisdom of countless hunts. We come in peace, Morrison said, using the formal greeting Elena had taught him. We seek knowledge of the old times. Velinara's scarred hide rippled with ancient wounds. The Pale Ones return? We knew this day would come. The pack mothers have whispered of it for generations. Torres stepped forward carefully. We don't understand the fear. Can you help us understand? Fear keeps the pack alive, Velinara replied. The old stories speak of hunters who moved like ghosts through our forests. They knew our ways better than we knew ourselves. They turned our own tactics against us. Morrison felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. These hunters. They were human? They called themselves by the death word. Velinara's voice carried the weight of genetic memory. They came during the time of burning stars. They fought not as individuals, but as something greater. Something that made the greatest pack leaders flee like frightened pups. What happened to them? Torres asked, Velinara's ears flattened against her skull. They disappeared as suddenly as they came, but the fear remained, passed from parent to cub through blood and bone. The pack remembers what the mind tries to forget. Back on the Stellar Dawn, Lieutenant Adams was making disturbing discoveries in the Galactic Archives. The databases contained detailed records of nearly every military engagement in the past 3 centuries. But there was a systematic gap exactly 200 years ago. Entire sectors showed missing data, corrupted files, and classification levels far beyond his clearance. Computer, search for Operation Silent Thunder, he commanded. Access denied. Classification level Alpha Black. Requires authorization from Earth Command Historical Division. Adams tried different approaches. Search for Kepler 442b military activities 200 years ago. Limited results found. File corruption detected in 73% of records from specified time period. The pattern was too consistent to be accidental. Someone had deliberately scrubbed the databases, removing evidence of human military activities during that exact time frame. But they had missed fragments, small pieces of data that painted a disturbing picture, references to psychological warfare protocols, and adaptive aggression techniques appeared in scattered reports. Medical files mentioned species-wide trauma, responses, and hereditary fear conditioning. Most disturbing were the casualty reports that listed no human deaths but massive casualties among hostile indigenous populations. Adams contacted Elena through secure channels. Dr. Rodriguez, I'm finding evidence of a systematic cover-up. Whatever happened here 200 years ago, Earth Command doesn't want anyone to know about it. Elena's voice crackled through the communicator. Keep digging. We're getting stories from both species about human warriors who appeared during something called the Time of Burning Stars. The fear response is genetic, passed down through generations. There's more, Adams continued. I found references to similar incidents on other worlds. Always the same time period. Always the same gaps in the records. And always the same result. Predator species developing hereditary fear responses to the word Marines. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was deeply troubling. Humanity had a secret history in the Outer Rim, a hidden chapter that had left scars on multiple species across the galaxy. The fear response wasn't just learned behavior, it was evolutionary adaptation to a threat so severe it had altered the genetic structure of entire civilizations. Elena stood on the mountain overlooking the scarred landscape of Kepler 442b, understanding that their diplomatic mission had uncovered something much larger than a simple territorial dispute. They were dealing with the consequences of humanity's past actions so traumatic they had become written into the very DNA of 3 apex predator species. The truth was buried somewhere in classified files and genetic memory, but Elena was determined to uncover it. The galaxy deserved to know what had happened during the Time of Burning Stars, and why the word Marines carried such terrible weight among the stars, the suns set over the war-torn world. Elena realized their mission had changed from negotiating peace to confronting humanity's darkest secrets. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the communication room of the Stellar Dawn, her hands shaking as she prepared to make the most important call of her career. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. The gaps in galactic records, the genetic trauma affecting 3 separate species, and the consistent timeline all pointed to a single disturbing conclusion. Humanity had a secret history on Kepler 442b, and Earth Command was the only source that could provide answers. Open a classified channel to Earth Command Historical Division, she instructed Lieutenant Adams. Maximum encryption. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern face of Admiral Patricia Wells. The Admiral's gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her pale blue eyes held the weight of decades of military service. Elena had never spoken to someone this high in the command structure before. Dr. Rodriguez, Admiral Wells said carefully, I understand you're requesting classified historical information regarding Operation Silent Thunder. Elena felt her heart. Skip, you know about Operation Silent Thunder? I know about many things, Doctor. The question is whether you have the clearance and the need to know. What exactly are you dealing with on Kepler 442b? Elena took a deep breath. 3 apex predator species that flee in terror at the mention of the word Marines. Genetic trauma that's been passed down for 200 years. Stories of human warriors who appeared during something called the Time of Burning Stars and psychologically destroyed entire civilizations. Admiral Wells was quiet for a long moment. You're certain about the genetic component? The fear response is too consistent and too immediate to be learned behavior. These species have been at war with each other for decades, but they all share the same terror when they hear that word. It's written into their DNA. The Admiral's expression grew grim. Very well, under diplomatic immunity protocols and given the current crisis, I'm authorizing the declassification of certain files. What you're about to learn is classified at the highest levels for good reason. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Elena nodded. I need to understand what happened here. The first file that appeared on her screen contained mission parameters. That made her blood run cold. Operation Silent Thunder had been a military colonization effort designed to establish human dominance on Kepler 442b through systematic psychological warfare. The planet was rich in rare minerals and strategically located for expansion into the Outer Rim. 200 years ago, Earth was not yet a member of the Galactic Council, Admiral Wells explained. We were expanding aggressively, claiming worlds for human settlement. Kepler 442b was identified as a prime target, but it was inhabited by 3 hostile species that attacked our survey teams on site. Elena scrolled through casualty reports. 47 humans killed in the first 6 months of contact. All survey teams wiped out completely. The predator species saw us as either prey or competition. Standard diplomatic protocols failed. The Galactic Council didn't exist yet, so there were no rules governing interspecies warfare. Command decided to solve the problem permanently. The next file contained the deployment orders for the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force under Colonel Richard Kane. Elena read the mission objectives with growing horror. Complete pacification of hostile indigenous populations through psychological dominance and fear conditioning. Colonel Kane was given complete operational freedom, Admiral Wells continued. His mission was to turn the apex predators of Kepler 442b into a compliant workforce for human colonial operations. The methods were left to his discretion. Elena opened Kane's personal logs and immediately understood why the files had been classified. The colonel's entries read like the diary of a man who had lost touch with basic humanity. His Marines weren't just fighting the 3 species, they were studying them, learning their weaknesses and exploiting their psychology with scientific precision. The Fenrithi rely on pack coordination, Kane had written. Individual Marines have been trained to disrupt their communication patterns through targeted elimination of pack leaders. Results show complete breakdown of tactical cohesion within 48 hours. Elena felt sick as she read further. The Asani culture values personal combat prowess above all else. Marines have been instructed to engage their champions in single combat using only primitive weapons. Consistent human victories have resulted in species-wide morale collapse. The entries about the pelagic were the worst. Kane described Marines diving to crushing ocean depths without breathing apparatus, hunting the species' most feared predators for sport. The psychological impact of humans demonstrating superiority in their own environment has exceeded all projections. Pelagic war leaders are abandoning ancestral territories rather than risk encounters with Marine units. Admiral Wells' voice cut through Elena's horror. The operation lasted 3 months. In that time, 2,000 Marines systematically dismantled the psychological foundation of 3 entire civilizations. They didn't just win battles, they broke the species' will to fight. Elena found combat reports that described Marines hunting the planet's apex predators during their off-duty hours. Using nothing but combat knives and tactical knowledge, they would track Fenrithi alphas through dense forests, wrestle Ursani battle chiefs in their own mountain caves, and dive to ocean trenches to fight pelagic war leaders in single combat. This wasn't warfare, Elena said quietly. This was systematic psychological torture on a species-wide scale. The results exceeded all expectations, Admiral Wells replied. Within 3 months, birth rates among all 3 species had dropped by 60%. Their territorial behaviors collapsed. Their warrior cultures began to crumble. The Marines had achieved complete dominance without deploying any weapons of mass destruction. Elena scrolled through medical reports that documented the psychological impact. Species-wide trauma responses, hereditary fear conditioning, genetic markers for anxiety and submission appearing in newborn populations. The trauma was so severe, it became encoded in their DNA, Admiral Wells explained. What started as learned behavior became evolutionary adaptation. The 3 species developed genetic programming to fear anything associated with human Marines. Elena found files showing that similar operations had been conducted on other worlds. During humanity's pre-council expansion phase, each time the results were the same. Predator species developing hereditary fear responses that persisted for generations. How many worlds? Elena asked. 17 confirmed operations, possibly more. The files from that period are incomplete. Elena discovered that Operation Silent Thunder had been abruptly terminated when Earth's government realized the full scope of what had happened. The psychological destruction of 3 entire species was deemed too extreme even for military objectives. Moreover, Earth was being considered for membership in the newly formed Galactic Council, and the operation's existence would have immediately disqualified humanity. Colonel Kane was reassigned to a desk job, Admiral Wells said. His Marines were sworn to secrecy and scattered across different units. All evidence of the operation was classified. The planet was abandoned, left to its traumatized inhabitants. Elena found the final mission reports that documented the withdrawal. The 3 species had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. The Fenrithi packs had dissolved into isolated family units. The Asani had retreated to the deepest mountain caves. The Pelagic had abandoned their coastal territories entirely, fleeing to the deepest ocean trenches. But the psychological damage was permanent, Elena said, reading the medical assessments. The trauma had become hereditary, passed down through genetic memory. The fear response became an evolutionary adaptation, Admiral Wells confirmed. Each generation inherited the terror of their parents. What we had done to 3 species became written into their biology. Elena realized the full scope of what she was dealing with. The current conflict on Kepler 442b wasn't just about territorial disputes. It was 3 traumatized species acting out the psychological damage inflicted by humanity 2 centuries ago. Their inability to form lasting alliances, their excessive aggression, their instinctive fear of authority figures all stemmed from the systematic psychological warfare they had endured. The Galactic Council knows about this, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Several Council species show similar fear responses to the word Marines, Admiral Wells admitted. They've been using humanity's military reputation as a tool for maintaining order. The mere threat of deploying human Marines has ended several potential conflicts. Elena felt the weight of truth settling on her shoulders. The galaxy's peace wasn't built on cooperation and mutual respect. It was built on fear. Fear of what humanity had done and what they might do again. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Because the system is breaking down, Admiral Wells replied. The fear-based approach is no longer sustainable. Species across the galaxy are questioning human motives. Some are beginning to organize resistance movements. The Council believes that honesty might be the only path forward. Elena looked at the files scattered across her screen. 200 years of humanity's darkest secret laid bare. The systematic psychological destruction of multiple species. The creation of hereditary trauma that persisted across generations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in the empty briefing room aboard the Stellar Dawn, surrounded by classified files that contained humanity's darkest secret. The truth about Operation Silent Thunder lay spread across multiple data screens, each document more disturbing than the last. Captain Jake Morrison entered quietly, his face grim after receiving his own briefing about his service's hidden history. I read the files, Morrison said, settling into the chair across from her. My predecessors turned an entire planet into a testing ground for psychological warfare. They broke 3 species so completely that the trauma became genetic. Elena looked up from a medical report detailing hereditary fear responses. The current conflict isn't really about territory. It's 3 traumatized species acting out psychological damage that was inflicted 2 centuries ago. Their inability to form lasting alliances, their excessive aggression, their instinctive distrust of authority figures all stems from what your Marines did to them. Morrison's jaw tightened. What we did to them? I wear the same uniform, carry the same title. That makes me responsible for their actions. The question is what we do with this knowledge, Elena said. We could complete our original mission and use their fear to force a peace treaty. The Council sent us here knowing about their terror response. They wanted us to use humanity's reputation as a weapon. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chang and Corporal Mike Torres joined them, both looking shaken. After reviewing the classified materials, Chang sat heavily in her chair. I joined the Marines to protect people, not to terrorize them. Reading those combat reports made me sick, Torres nodded grimly. Colonel Kane's logs read like the diary of a monster. His Marines were hunting sentient beings for sport during their off-duty hours, using combat knives against creatures that could tear apart starships with their bare claws. Elena pulled up a genetic analysis report. The trauma isn't just psychological anymore. It's written into their DNA. Each generation inherits the fear of their parents. Fenrithi cubs are born with anxiety responses to human pheromones. Asani. Children instinctively submit to bipedal authority figures. Pelagic offspring show stress reactions to specific sound frequencies associated with human speech patterns. Morrison studied the data with the eye of a trained tactician. This explains why previous mediation attempts failed. The Altarian peacekeepers. The Centauri diplomats, the Rigelian mediators, they all approach this as a territorial dispute. But you can't negotiate with genetic trauma. The fear response serves a purpose now, Elena continued. It keeps the three species from forming effective alliances against outside threats. Their terror of human intervention prevents them from uniting against the Galactic Council. It's a form of control that's been in place for 200 years. Chang leaned forward. So we're part of a system that's been using psychological torture to maintain galactic peace. That's what you're telling us. The Council species that show similar fear responses to the word Marines, Elena confirmed. They've all been conditioned to associate human military power with complete helplessness. The mere threat of Marine deployment has ended several potential conflicts without a shot being fired. Torres stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the scarred surface of Kepler 442b. Those burn marks in the forests, the collapsed mountain peaks, the dead zones in the oceans. That's all from there. Internal wars, but the wars themselves are symptoms of the psychological damage we inflicted. Elena accessed Ambassador Kethfer's personal files, which had been included in the classified data dump. The Saurian diplomat's own species was subjected to a similar operation during humanity's expansion phase. His fear responses are genetic, too, but he's learned to function despite them. Morrison read over her shoulder. That's why he emphasized human warfare experience during the briefing. He was preparing himself to deal with Marines, trying to maintain diplomatic composure despite his genetic programming. The same with Zilthara, Elena added. The Vexani trade representative species was one of the first to be subjected to psychological conditioning. Their entire culture shifted from aggressive expansion to peaceful commerce after contact with human Marines. Zhang pulled up the tactical assessments from Operation Silent Thunder. The methods were specifically designed to create lasting psychological damage. Kane's Marines didn't just defeat their enemies, they studied them first. They learned each species' cultural values, their social structures, their deepest fears, and then systematically destroyed all of it. Elena found Kane's analysis of Fenrithi, pack psychology. He identified their reliance on collective identity and targeted pack leaders for elimination. But not quick deaths? Public executions designed to break the morale of entire packs. The survivors were left with a genetic memory that cooperation leads to death. Torres returned to the table. The Osani cultural analysis is worse, Kane realized. Their entire self-image was built on individual combat prowess. So he ordered his Marines to challenge their champions to single combat using primitive weapons. When humans consistently won, it shattered their fundamental understanding of strength. Morrison found the psychological profiles of pelagic society. The ocean dwellers valued territorial dominance above all else. Kane's Marines invaded their deepest sanctuaries, places no surface dweller had ever reached. They hunted leviathans in their own trenches, proving that no place was safe from human reach. Elena scrolled through the final psychological assessments. The combination of all three approaches created a perfect storm of trauma. Each species lost not just battles, but their entire sense of identity. Their children inherited fears they couldn't understand, and their cultures adapted around those fears. Chang studied the genetic markers that had been identified in all three species. The fear response became an evolutionary advantage. The individuals who showed the strongest fear reactions were the ones who survived to reproduce. Over time, the entire species became genetically programmed to submit to human authority. And we've been using that programming to maintain galactic peace, Morrison said quietly. Every time the Council threatens to deploy human Marines, they're triggering genetic trauma responses in multiple species. Elena realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. The current galactic order isn't built on cooperation or mutual respect. It's built on the systematic psychological destruction of multiple civilizations. We're not peacekeepers, we're the threat that keeps everyone else in line. Torres pulled up reports from other worlds that had undergone similar operations. 17. Confirmed operations, possibly more. That's 17 civilizations that have been psychologically crippled to serve human interests. The worst part is that it worked, Chung said. The galaxy has been relatively peaceful for 2 centuries. Trade routes are secure, major conflicts are rare. The Council has successfully maintained order through fear. Elena found medical reports documenting the long-term effects of the trauma conditioning, but the cost has been enormous. Birth rates among affected species have never recovered. Their cultural development has been stunted. Their technological advancement has slowed. We've created a galaxy of psychologically damaged civilizations. Morrison stood and walked to the tactical display showing Kepler 442b's surface. The 3 species down there have been suffering for 200 years because of what we did. Their children are born with terrors they can't understand. Their cultures have been crippled by trauma they didn't earn. The question is whether we can help them heal, Elena said, or whether we use our knowledge to complete the original mission and force them into another fear-based peace treaty. Zhang looked at the classified files spread across the table. We could walk away. Report that the species are too hostile for diplomatic intervention. Let the Council use other methods to maintain order. Torres shook his head. That would be abandoning them to 2 more centuries of psychological damage. These species deserve better than that. Elena felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. There's a third option. We could try to break the cycle. Acknowledge what was done to them and work to heal the trauma instead of exploiting it. Morrison studied the tactical implications. That would mean admitting to systematic psychological warfare against multiple species. It would expose humanity's role in maintaining galactic order through fear. The political consequences would be enormous. But it might be the only way too? Create lasting peace, Elena replied. Real peace, not the artificial calm that comes from terrorizing entire civilizations into submission. The team sat in silence, each contemplating the magnitude of the decision before them. They could maintain the status quo and complete their mission using humanity's reputation as a weapon. Or they could try to heal 2 centuries of psychological damage and face the consequences of revealing humanity's darkest secret. Elena looked at the tactical display showing the 3 species' territories. Somewhere out there, traumatized beings were passing genetic fears to their children, living with terrors they couldn't understand or overcome. The cycle had continued for 200 years, and it would continue for 200 more unless someone had the courage to break it. The decision would reshape not just the relationship between the 3 predator species, but humanity's place in the galactic community. The stories began spreading across the galaxy like a disease that no one wanted to catch. In the dark corners of alien bars and military outposts, predator species whispered about the humans and their warriors called Marines. The Kethver had been the first to spread the word, but they were not the last. Commander Zixith sat in his private quarters aboard the flagship Bloodclaw, staring at the reports from his intelligence officers. Every single one told the same story. The humans were not like other prey species. They fought back with a fury that matched their own, but with something extra that made them truly terrifying. The Varash had learned this lesson the hard way. On Kepler 442b, their hunting parties had expected easy kills and found themselves being hunted instead. The survivors spoke of humans who moved like ghosts through their own territory, setting traps and ambush that turned their advantages into weaknesses. The word Marines had become a curse word in their language. Captain Lisa Park had been there during the rescue mission. She watched from the evacuation ships as the Marine squads moved through the colony like a deadly machine. Each squad worked together so perfectly that they seemed to share one mind. When the Varash tried to use their pack tactics, the Marines were already 3 steps ahead. Sergeant Danny Cooper, had led his squad through the industrial sector where the aliens had set up their hunting grounds. The Varash thought they knew every hiding spot and every escape route. They were wrong. Cooper and his Marines turned every building into a fortress and every corridor into a killing field. The aliens learned that day that humans could be patient. Hunters when they needed to be, the Zephyrian Empire had their own painful memories of human Marines. Admiral Susan Blake had commanded the defense of Arcturus Station, but it was the Marines who had turned the tide. The Zephyrians had perfected their boarding tactics over centuries of conquest. They would swarm enemy ships like angry insects, overwhelming defenders with pure numbers and savage fury. Colonel Jim Peters had shown them that numbers meant nothing against proper tactics. His Marines had turned every section of the station into a carefully planned battlefield. The Zephyrians poured through breach points expecting panicked defenders. Instead, they found warriors who fought with both savage determination and cold precision. Lance Corporal Kelly Wright had held her position at intersection Delta 7 for 6 hours straight. Wave after wave of Zephyrian warriors charged her. Squad and wave after wave died in the crossfire. The aliens had never encountered defenders who could maintain such discipline under pressure. They expected fear and panic. They found only steady aim and deadly accuracy. The siege had lasted 18 hours, but the Marines never wavered. When ammunition ran low, they used their knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. The Zephyrians had never seen such dedication to victory. They retreated not because they were weak, but because they finally understood what true predators looked like. The Shaltari had considered themselves the ultimate hunters before they met the Marines. Their homeworld was a death world where only the strongest survived. They had evolved into perfect killing machines with razor-sharp claws and lightning-fast reflexes. When human colonists settled on Proxima Centauri 4, the Shaltari saw it as an insult to their dominance. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been one of the lucky survivors from Research Station Alpha. She watched from the rescue ship as the 2nd Marine Battalion deployed across the planet. The Shaltari had turned the entire world into their hunting ground, setting traps and ambush throughout the jungle. They thought they had every advantage. Colonel Mike Johnson had studied the tactical reports with growing anger. The Shaltari were not just killing humans for food or territory. They were hunting them for sport, keeping some alive just to extend the game. Johnson had seen many things in his military career, but this level of cruelty demanded a response. Sergeant First Class Linda Davis had led her platoon through the same jungle where the Shaltari had hunted humans for months. The aliens had every environmental advantage and knew every tree and rock. But the Marines had something the Shaltari had never encountered, the ability to learn and adapt faster than their enemies. Davis and her squad turned the hunting grounds into a nightmare for the Shaltari. They used the aliens' own traps against them, setting ambush in places where the hunters felt safest. Within days, the Shaltari were no longer hunting humans. They were hiding from them. The stories spread from species to species, carried by traders and diplomats who had witnessed the battles firsthand. The galaxy's apex predators began meeting in secret councils, sharing their experiences and trying to understand what made humans so dangerous. The word Marines appeared in every report and every whispered conversation. Ambassador Zixt found himself in an emergency session of the Predator Council, a gathering that had never been called before in galactic history. The most feared species in the galaxy sat around a table, and for the first time in their lives, they were afraid. Not of each other, but of a single word that had become legendary across the stars. The Varash representative spoke first, his voice shaking with remembered fear. They don't fight like prey animals. They fight like predators, but with something we lack. They can think several moves ahead while still fighting with pure instinct. The Zephyrian delegate nodded in agreement. Our warriors reported that the humans showed no fear, even when facing certain death. They fought with both intelligence and savagery. It was like fighting ourselves, but worse. The Shaltari representative was the most disturbed of all. They turned our own world against us. made us the hunted in our own territory. The word Marines has become a curse among our people. Our young ones have nightmares about humans in green uniforms. As the council debated, one thing became clear to everyone present. The galaxy had a new apex predator, and it was not any of the species sitting around that table. It was humanity, and specifically their warrior class called Marines, Captain. Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral after his successful first contact negotiations, found himself in an interesting position during the next diplomatic meeting. The same alien species that had once demanded combat trials now approached negotiations with obvious nervousness. They kept glancing at his Marine escort as if expecting an attack at any moment. "We understand you have warriors called Marines," Greystock said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps we could discuss trade agreements instead of military demonstrations," Morrison smiled, enjoying the irony. "I think that's a wise decision." Behind him, Sergeant Major Paul Thompson stood at attention in his dress uniform. The alien delegates kept stealing nervous glances at him, as if his mere presence was a threat. The word Marines had become more than just a military designation. It had become a legend that struck fear into the hearts of creatures who had never known fear before. The galaxy's predator species had finally learned what it meant to be prey. And the word Marines had become the sound of their nightmares.